interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets of success. Welcome to the Private Equity Podcast with Alex Rawlings.
Welcome to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast, interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets to success. Today, I'm very pleased to have joining us Marc Prine. Marc is a specialist industrial and organizational psychologist and works with private equity firms in the US. So welcome to Marc, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So what we're going to find out here is what exactly a industrial organizational psychologist is and does, how that benefits private equity firms, and also how he works with PE firms to decrease the mistakes made when hiring and also acquisition due diligence. So really keen to get jumped into that. So I think the first thing for us to understand, Marc, is exactly what it is you do. So if you could give us a quick breakdown of Marc and what exactly an industrial organizational psychologist is, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. So what me and my firm does is works with organizations, private equity or fund clients to use evidence-based practices in evaluating talent, right? Who's the best person to hire, succession planning. You know, as a firm, when you're making an acquisition, you're betting on the management team as much as you're betting on the product. So really trying to run the models and helping to predict the right performance and what you need, and really focusing on the talent.
Perfect. Excellent. So with the work that you do, so you mentioned obviously about focusing on talent. So how and I know there's various different levels, and you're kind of at the top end level. If we look at some clients, will just do a personality profiling test, whether that be a DISC assessment or an insights assessment. How does the level of what you do compare to maybe that kind of just initial quick 30-minute review kind of process?
Yeah, sure. So the process that we take actually is a little bit more customized and specialized, right? Every single acquisition and every single organization is different. You put somebody who's wildly successful for one of your fund companies and have them run one of your other companies, and they're going to fail miserably. And that's because the market's different, or the strategy's different, the organization's culture is different. So the first thing that I do when taking on a new project or working, whether it's from the due diligence perspective or looking to help with talent selection or development, is identify what's important here. What are the knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies that make this place different than your top competitors, right? What are those things that make you successful here and not somewhere else, right? You can be a CFO, the CFO for a small fund client that's got $50 million in revenue versus the CFO for Google, Apple, Facebook. They're two completely different skill sets. They're two completely different people. One of those people can be wildly successful in one environment and terrible at the other. So the first thing that I do is identify what are those differentiators and what's important. And then from there, I think, okay, well, now we know what we want to measure. How are we going to measure it? I belong to a library of dozens of different types of assessments, whether, all validated and kind of used properly for selection. I'll do interviews. I'll put people through exercises, whether they be role plays or inbox assessments, where we give a chief technology officer a line of code that they need to make some decisions based off of. All of those different types of things really evaluate not only can they do the job, but can they do the job here the way that you need them to.
Perfect. So there's a lot of synergy certainly between the kind of things that we understand. It sounds like basically, in essence, you understand what the organization is looking to achieve, what they're looking to do, and then you're mirroring that against the individual's competencies, but then going a lot more into the psychology of what that person does. And I couldn't agree more. I know some really fantastic executives that have come out of big organizations and done incredibly well. There's one that springs to mind actually works now within a private equity firm as an operating partner. And he's done an incredible rollout in California, but he came from big business. But I see so many firms in private equity hire direct from big companies, such maybe not in my world the Apples and the likes, but certainly within, whether it's a big industrial manufacturing company, Danaher's a very popular business, and hiring directly and pulling straight out of that. And a lot of mistakes are made because the infrastructure is completely different, the outcomes are completely different. And when you're looking at publicly listed businesses, the returns going for the shareholder, and the growth isn't maybe not the key element. It's the kind of perception of the business and what's going on. Obviously, a lot of that does come with what happens, but it's a completely different world in private equity. So I'm not surprised to hear you to making that comparison.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. And it's the environment in which they're doing something, right? You take a CFO or a senior financial analyst at a Lloyd's of London or big bank, and you put them into a small organization where they might be doing something that they haven't done for 15 years. I use this example often, right? I had a client who they loved poaching from the Deloitte, Price Waterhouse Coopers of the world. Especially on the technology side, these people had the hands-on keyboard skills that they needed, but they didn't have the team of 20 people to help them do something. And so some of that nimbleness, scrappy resilience that you might not have needed at the big firm, they would come to this, private equity backed company and flounder.
No, absolutely. It's too popular discussion. There's lots of facts and figures about it, and I don't know where they get all these facts and figures out. And obviously, it works very well from a recruitment perspective that we can throw all these failure rates out there. But there's too much of a turnover. I think most people would agree. In most companies, there is too much of a churn at the top level, and if there isn't a churn, there's usually a question over whether one's right or two people are right, kind of leading that business. So that kind of leads us in very nicely, actually, to what within your world, Mark, for the conversations that you have and discussions and recommendations and the work that you do with private equity firms, what's the kind of biggest mistake, or what one mistake do you see either PE firms or the portfolio companies making?
I think the one size fits all approach is really the biggest mistake that they make, right? They have fund companies that are in different industries, or they might focus in a particular sector, but different geographies and different things. And they try to manage their portfolio companies the same, regardless of some of those nuances. And I think that recognizing those nuances and not expecting the one size fits all approach to actually work. I think that's really the biggest mistake, not taking the step back. I say this all the time, right? There would be a private equity fund would never make an acquisition without having the accountants running all the numbers, without having their team doing all the financial modeling. Well, you're betting on the jockey as much as you're betting on the horse when it comes to making an investment. So why are you not taking the extra step and really doing that right due diligence?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at all the due diligence that these guys complete when they're doing their investments, and we built a brand around risk and due diligence and process. They come in with their big deal processes, and then trying to understand the talent is absolutely key, and making sure that they obviously get that right. So I couldn't agree more. What would you say firms should be doing differently, other than the usual plug of use me to help that? But if a firm's out there that maybe they're going through investments right now and they're not making these steps to maybe have a little bit more of an assessment of the senior management team, what would you say would be simple things that they could start doing right away to themselves, maybe before they engage with somebody like yourself?
No, I think one of the first things you can do is really think about what is it that you need and where do you want to go. I don't assess talent based on where you are right now. I assess the talent based on if all of these other models that you have and you're growing in these particular ways, where do you want to grow and how do you want to do that? Can this person who built this company to be $50 million in revenue, can they get it to $200 million in revenue, right? Can they help scale it, right? Because as you grow a company and as you grow a business, the scale is really the biggest challenge that you run up against. You can be a really good software developer and you have a really good idea and you build a business and you grow it to a certain size. But there's the Peter principle, right? Where we always hit that ceiling at some point and what our knowledge, skills, and abilities are. And so can you have the honest conversation with that person and say, you're a really good chief technology officer. You're a really good, head of research and development for our company. Maybe we should think about bringing in somebody to be the CEO to really get this and maximize the opportunity that we have in front of us.
Okay, absolutely makes sense. So talk to us. There's two different processes that I know that you're doing here. So just to give us a bit of perspective, because one of them is on, if I'm right by saying, one of them is on the due diligence side. When you're looking at, what a lot of private equity people would say, kind of pre-deal type work and that assessment, that due diligence, if you just mentioned, and then the other part of the business is looking at actually when you're looking to make an acquisition of an individual and looking to bring, or a firm's looking to bring someone into the portfolio, you will help. So talk to us about the differences and the nuances and kind of how you go about helping firms.
Yeah, so I'd say that those are the two kind of big buckets. It's on the due diligence side, and then it's on the operation side. So on the due diligence side, it is, whether it's after the LOI is signed and the lawyers are doing their work and the accountants are doing their work, I'll help to evaluate the management team and the leadership team and really understand, and this also works for tuck-ins within organizations, right? If you have a fund client and you're looking to kind of make a strategic acquisition or whatever it may be, and it's really understanding, these owners bootstrapped it, they built up their leadership team, however they might have done it. And so can they have a boss, right? They haven't had a boss in a long time. They maybe can they work with this firm? Can they scale it to the way that I mentioned earlier? So that's kind of phase one, another part of it with a tuck-in acquisition is, can you take this culture and this group of people and merge them into this new organization, right? You take two companies that might do similar work and play in a similar space, and they make sense as a strategic tuck-in and a strategic acquisition. But can they actually work together, and can you merge these two organizations together to get the type of synergies that on paper make sense? And often what we say on paper or the ideas that we have when we're sitting around a conference room talking about potentially merging two organizations, 42% of mergers fail because of they're not properly integrating the people. That's some recent research that was done. And so on some research that was done back in 2016 with private equity funds, they say that the most predictive and the most worthwhile exercise that they go through during due diligence is using an organizational psychologist to help them evaluate the talent. That's something that's come up, and that's something that private equity says it's not one that's done the most often, but when it's done, it carries the most efficacy in terms of actually helping to successfully predict the goal achievement at the end of the day.
Okay, perfect. So it's kind of going into an acquisition, and then when they're getting in, that's that later stages, they've signed the letter of intent, you're then coming in and basically giving them further information. So look, this is what sits, these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, and giving them a little bit more in the playbook of what they actually need to do post the deal closing. Because if the culture is completely different, it's not so much about let's cancel the deal. It's here's what you will need to do to make this transition. Here's some of the issues. Here's some of the challenges. This is what it looks like. This is what these guys look like. This is what you're going to have to bring together, and therefore they can make a good decision. I've seen Americanism is tuck in. We call it kind of add on, and I know that's used both sides of the ponds for the Brits listening and Europeans listening. But it's about having that more information, that more knowledge in the toolbox, where everything you're coming up to when you're making these acquisitions. And a lot of it centers nicely, obviously, from a recruiter's executive search perspective around people, but that's literally going to be the difference in the most part between what makes it successful. So it's giving people that additional information that you're kind of delivering there, so they can make better educated decisions on the back of it.
Exactly. Most of the time, you're not just taking intellectual property and selling it 2 days later, right? You're growing and you're scaling, and you have a product, and you have marketing, and you have go-to-market strategy and all of these different things that play a factor in it. And so when you give somebody that big check to run their business, are you sure that they're going to use that money the right way?
No, absolutely. And what have you seen? I mean, kind of stories where that's when you've actually gone through this, and let's say, I'm running a private equity firm. We've never done kind of further due diligence basically on its people and its culture and its environment, either in pre-deal or even when we're doing a replacement of an exec. When have you seen and what have you found that surprised private equity investors when you've come in and done that due diligence and you've shared things? What surprised them? What have they learned from the work that you've done?
Yeah, so some of the times it's recognizing and helping them see that the person who has the title isn't necessarily the person who's really the valuable individual within the business, right? A lot of the times the senior executives will get some kind of stay package and they have to hit XYZ metrics. But when I'm going in and digging around a little bit, a lot of the times I will uncover, hey, this person who's the top salesperson, or they're actually the person who is the controller and not the CFO. Those are the people that you want to make sure stay. Those are the people who have the connections with all of your key clients. Those are the people that are having all the good ideas and the actual have the leadership within the organization. So that's usually a big one. Identifying some of those other talent issues within the organization. Sometimes it's recognizing the strengths and weaknesses and just some of those small changes that can be made to make sure that things happen successfully. I recently did a due diligence for a client where founder had a really good management team. He had a CFO who was really a glorified controller, really good at closing the books, really good at making sure the trains run on time, was not thinking big picture strategically from a financial perspective. And it wasn't necessarily his fault. He was a high potential person that got plucked out of public accounting, had been working in this role for about a year or two, and really just needed a little bit more mentorship and help. So what we actually did was worked with the fund company where they brought in somebody who had been a CFO for some of their other fund companies, where the private equity firm brought in somebody to be a good advisor and a good coach for this person for a little bit, just to help them get to that next level, right? One of the things that I always measure is potential, not just performance of the current state, but potential long-term. And so we knew that this person had all the tools in order to do it. They just needed a few exercises. So the first time that this firm did a tuck-in acquisition, they had somebody else there helping the CFO through the process. The first time, the second time that person was involved a little bit. And then the third time, this controller really grew into the CFO, and they've been wildly successful in other acquisitions. And they've actually recently just spun out and sold the organization. So it's been a really good success story for them.
So that's really interesting, and a lot of I think there's a lot of frustration with private equity, and we recently did a survey private equity professionals, mainly at partner level, managing partner, founder, principal type level, and we're asking what the key challenges are, and a lot of them spoke about the underperformance of their portfolio companies. So, but mainly focus on the actual individuals and those frustrations. So it's, I suppose, if they're already asking those questions and starting to think, is this person right for us? Not only can you give us that further clarity of, yes, it's likely that is the case, although they've probably worked it out for themselves, but also, what does good look like? What do we actually want to achieve here? What's going to be the right profile? And then delving into that. What do you see a lot? Really interesting, actually. On the controller CFO is a really big talking point between a lot of PE firms that I speak to, and it's the most transition position that we see of people coming in and out of and getting changes there. What do you see of the actual underperformer side? What do you tend to see why people are not a real CFO and maybe they're more of a kind of an controller? Let's not say underperformer, because everyone's got performance levels at different levels, yeah. But difference between controller and CFO, I think, is a good question.
Yeah, so there, it's a big part of it is the strategic mindset. It's when you have a really good CFO that person is able to think long term. They are able to use financial data to help advise the CEO on major decisions. So do they have the courage to tell the CEO that they're about to make a big mistake? Do they do it in a way that is, do they have a persuasive way about them that they can use the information in order to do that? On the other end, there's also a leadership component. As you grow a fund company, the controller goes from maybe a bookkeeper and a controller to probably having financial planning and budgeting and all of these other things that your PE firms are going to want to see, right? The amount of reporting that changes when you go from being privately held to with just a few founders to being held by a firm with a board and all of these other aspects, right? The amount of projections that are going to be asked of, the amount of of reporting that a firm usually asks their CFOs to do grows exponentially. And so understanding not these are the numbers that the private equity fund is going to want to see and my board wants to see, but what is the story that we need to tell in order to show them that we're going on the right trajectory? Okay. That's kind of the big difference.
Excellent.
Right?
And on the strategic piece, how do you actually, looking for trade secrets here, but certainly looking to understand, because I'm thinking, okay, yeah, strategy, that word's probably well overused within the industry. And if a lot of us look at what strategic is, we'll all come up with kind of a different definition. How do you kind of go about understanding how good somebody is at the kind of strategic end, which is maybe the less measurable type side, as opposed to how good you are at closing the books?
No, sure. No, it's really easy to measure. Can somebody close the books well? Right. That's something that's simple. So this actually goes back, right? You bring up a good point. The first thing that I do when working in this situation is I ask the fund about what the strategy is, and I really understand what's the direction that they want to go in. I look at the market. I understand what their competitors are doing. Where do they want to be and how do they want to get there is important to understand, because then that defines for me what the strategy is that I need to measure within the people. There are personality aspects and constructs that can measure whether or not somebody has long-term thinking, right? Are they going to walk over the quarter today to get the dollar tomorrow? Are they willing to invest, and do they have the patience to sit and wait, or are they going to sell at the first opportunity? And so those are some things that you can measure. And then in an interview perspective, I'm able to suss some of those things out, right? That's one of the differentiators when you have a trained psychologist do interviewing, is the ability to really get behind the words that somebody's going to say and get away from the canned stories that people are used to saying in an interview perspective, right? Everybody just walks in, oh, my biggest weakness is I work too hard and I can never quit at the end of the day, right? Well, let's leave those trash stories behind us, and let's actually get at the things that motivate you, the things that engage you, the things that change your behavior, the things that get under your skin. Those are all components of aspects of the way that I interview and the way that a psychologist interviews versus most others.
Excellent. I bet on dates, Mark, and things like that, you're just psychoanalyzing anybody else, at least previously, psychoanalyzing everybody and wondering what's going on. I bet your friends are having conversations and you're like, I understand why you're saying that, but I'm not going to tell you why.
Yeah, there's some things that my wife just wishes I would keep to myself some days. It probably would keep me out of the doghouse.
Absolutely. Well, we all know that too well. So we talked about underperformance. What about top performers? What do you perceive as a behavioral psychologist? What are the three, and it might be difficult to throw three, but let's aim for it. What are the three top attributes you regard to top performance?
Sure. So number one, I would say for a really good leader is kind of the social awareness piece of it. The ability for somebody to understand what's happening, everybody else around them, be able to say, okay, well, Alex is making this decision. Why would Alex be making this decision? What's motivating Alex to make this decision? And really understand what drives the people around them so that they can then use that to get the best out of the people around them, right? How can I motivate my team? The really good leaders aren't the ones who are necessarily scoring the goals. They're the ones who are able to get everybody around them to score as many goals as they possibly can. Okay. Right. So I'd say that's really number one, right? The ability, that's the difference between a top performer and a leader, is somebody who can actually get other people around them to produce the best work possible. That's kind of number one. Number two is this idea called locus of control. We have internal and external locus of control. The person who's very external locus of control is the world happens to me. The world did this. I use a golf example all the time, right? When somebody hits a bad shot and you hear them say, "Oh, the ball moved, the club slipped," all of those things, right? Yep. Blaming these inanimate objects. That's the person who has external locus of control. The person who has really good internal locus of control, right? They control the world. Their environment is because what they do to it. They take the ownership, they take the onus on themselves to make change happen, right? When I hit a bad golf shot, somebody's gonna say, "Oh, what happened? I'm a bad golfer. I moved my hips, I picked up my head, I did something that affected that golf shot to going into the woods, into the water, over the green, whatever it could have been." So that's kind of number two, I would say, is that idea of locus of control, and did they control the environment, or does the environment control them? And then the third one will really be that long-term forward thinking, right? Can they sit and think, and are they have the, do they need that instant gratification? There's that famous study that was done with 5-year-olds where a psychologist put a marshmallow in front of them, and they said, "You can eat this marshmallow now, or if you wait 15 minutes, I'll give you another marshmallow and you'll get 2 marshmallows." Right? What was actually found long-term was the kids who actually waited for that second marshmallow, knowing that, okay, if I just wait 15 minutes, I'll get 2 marshmallows. Those people end up being wildly more successful in the long run, right? They're less likely to use drugs. They're less likely to drop out of school. Can you have that type of, internal measurement to say, I'll wait. Can you put off that instant gratification that we keep in our pockets all day long, right? And be impulsive. There's a really good study that was done that looked at we in the States here call the Great Recession, right? The 2008 housing bubble. And it looked at Fortune 500 companies before, during, and after really the financial crisis. And what it felt like, and what it found was the organizations that were impulsive, the organizations that decided to change their course of action, and the ones who really stopped investing in their people or doing things drastically different, they ended up losing. They thought that they were being smart and they were pivoting and they were really thinking, whereas the ones who were smart and kind of like, all right, well, let's wait and see. Let's be conscious. Let's not do anything drastic. Let's not act impulsively. They ended up outperforming the rest of their peers in that kind of class. And so the leaders who can really not act impulsively and really start and think and make good decisions and not be drastic, that's going to win in almost every situation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And that marshmallow story, I hadn't actually heard it before until this week, actually. Ironically, you bring that up. I've just literally heard that on, I'm going to forget which podcast it is, but it's fascinating how things like that, it's like, it does lay weight, which I don't like, you're kind of born that way. But I think it's that kind of choices and the environment and how that shapes us, and we can all change that. I'm a big believer of that. But I find it fascinating that things like that within children can determine how successful. And I cannot remember. I've listened to a lot of stuff this weekend, but that how weird that's. I've never heard that, and I've heard it twice within probably about 3 days. So that's very interesting. But your initial point with regards to the controlling factors over people, I find absolutely fascinating. It's something that we look for heavily here. And recently I've just interviewed somebody to come into this business and work within raw selection, and everything was market's fault. Everything was this fault. There was no okay, actually, I didn't perform as well as I'd like, or this, I need to develop this area of my game. Everything was someone else's fault. And I was just like, I cannot deal with somebody like that. You've got to have at least, of course, there's going to be market factors. Of course, if you're trying to sell airline tickets in the middle of COVID, there's going to be elements that you're going to struggle. But ironically, private air travel has gone through the roof during COVID. People are still needing to get around, so it's been able to fluctuate. And obviously, if you work for Jet2, you might struggle. But you've got to think about or Delta for our US friends,
Sure.
and you're going to struggle. Whereas if you're flying private jets all over, then it's going to be a bit different. But there's that kind of change of your environment of what can I be better? What can I do more? And certainly during, I'm sick of hearing about coronavirus, but it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, is how do we actually leverage what it's brought? For us, it's developed our internal marketing processes and systems, and give us a lot of time to actually look at how we operate and what we do and really upgrade. But it's interesting how a lot of people will just literally lay down and kind of just wait. Well, I'll wait till it was all finished and we'll see what's happened, or it was all COVID's fault. There's an element of that, I think, in a lot of businesses, and those kinds of the glass half full, the glass half empty, I think is a relevant type thing from there. But
optimism is actually a personality trait that's shown to be very very important in leadership, right? Because when you look at something that this is going to work out well, and this is going to be something that we're going to be opportunistic and we're going to make something happen, that's contagious. The people around you know that, they feel that, right? If you're going into a situation and and in your heart you're like, this isn't going to be good, your team isn't going to run into battle for you.
No, completely get that. Positivity and going at it. I listened again something on a podcast actually about that. Is that optimism is there was this, I think it was Roman emperor or something, who there were it might have been. Anyway, there was a big battle. It might have been Japanese, I can't remember, but there was a big battle about to happen, and this leader had a coin. And they believed a lot in the gods and having favor, and he said, their odds are against them. They were significantly lower in headcount against the other one, and against their foe. And he did a speech at the start, and he said, if everything favors us, this coin will land on heads. And he flicked the coin, and obviously it landed on heads, and it gave everybody that extra purpose, that extra optimism that things were on this side. And after the battle, he was having a conversation, and one of his generals or whatever came up to him and said, I was brave. What would have happened if it would have landed on tails? And he said, can't have. I've got a double-sided coin. And just giving people that perspective that it is possible, and things are on your side, and you can make the best of what was obviously a massive battle, which from what I was told, they won. But apologies for not giving anybody the historical lesson that maybe you would like there, but in bits and pieces. But I found that very interesting.
No,
certainly from that.
Absolutely.
So private equity, obviously I know, again, from, as we call ourselves, outsiders, we're not doing the deals ourselves, where, a support function and service to the industry as is Raw Selection. What do you love about private equity? And equally, what do you hate about it?
Sure. What I really like about it is the opportunistic nature of it. I like the data-driven mindset. I like the I can talk really well with private equity folks, because while my analytics and thoughts are all towards the people side of things, right? They think the same way about just different things, and I find that looking at organizations that are getting private equity funded, it's always interesting to see what they all have in common, right? What the leaders have in common, what their markets have in common. And so those are some of the things that I really like about it. I like the opportunity. I'm a capitalist, free market enterprise type guy. So I love the way that this really helps. When you put that type of cash infusion into an organization, think about the ripple effect that it has within a particular community, within a particular group of people, within, some people's lives, right? The number of jobs that get created, the number of ways, right? And it really, I say private equity puts kerosene on a fire unlike anything else I've ever seen. And it's been really fun just getting to play a part in that type of game.
Absolutely.
In terms of what I don't like about it, I mean, it's people are stuck in their ways. People, I usually only get called in and I only usually get new clients when somebody's gotten burned enough times.
When it goes wrong.
They've made enough mistakes. And so usually, the slow to adopt something new has been, some of the ways to do it. But then also it's kind of a copycat industry where they see their friends at another firm doing something and they say we should do that too.
Yeah, I think that's typical of a lot of industries in total. But yes, it can be a bit certainly frustrating, and yeah, very similar to what we would perceive as well, to be honest. Yeah. So what I find, one of my key things that I think about when I think of top performers is that they love self-development, or maybe not love it, but it's something that they know that is a key part of their life. And the more you invest in yourself, the better. Probably one of the best known, I'm sure people will argue that he's not a true private equity investor, but Warren Buffett, the best investment you can make is within yourself. So I'm keen to listen from you. What are your kind of influences? What would you read, watch, listen, that maybe if someone's listening here and they're wanting to learn more about it, or just a good book or a good read that you could recommend?
Yeah, so shockingly enough, I like the data-driven kind of pieces. I like reading the Freakonomics or the Adam Grant type books where they're really focused on how do you take research and put it into practice. And I think that Give and Take is a really interesting book, and that's one I recommend. There's a interesting book called Peak. If you hold on one second, I'll actually look it up. Yeah, so, oh no, that's, sorry.
It's all right. Pressure's on. Trying to find things on Amazon or whatever you bought in your audit history.
It's, yeah, so, sorry about that. I should have thought about that. There's some books that kind of look at peak performance and things like that from the data perspective. Mm-hmm. I like to look at, the Malcolm Gladwells of the world will take research and I'll find what they're talking about, right? Like, the 10,000 hours really came from a Florida State psychologist who, that he talked about in Outliers. And so that guy wrote a book and he's like, well, Gladwell kind of got it wrong, right? The 10,000 hours is 10,000 hours is important to master something, but it's actually 10,000 hours of purposeful practice, right? When I go out on a golf course and I just hack away for 4 hours, right? Me doing that 10,000 times isn't going to get me anywhere. Versus if I actually spent 10,000 hours focused on the range, okay, keep your arm like this, keep your head down, keep your this and your that, right? That's actually what gets you to that right place, right? You looked at, the psychologist studied violin players and how they master learning a piece of music, and they don't play the whole thing through every single time. What they do is they pick, a few bars at a time and they really perfect those few bars. And then over time, they string it all together and really, really drive that, which is a really good story and a really good book. And yeah, so that's that for me.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I know it's self-development's absolutely a key part, and it again links to it. You that golf swing. You're going to go away. You're going to look at how, I don't know golf particularly well myself, unfortunately, but Tiger Woods, I know he kind of came off the scene and has now come back as Rory McIlroy.
Yeah.
That's probably about it. But how they developed it. Tiger redid his whole swing, didn't he? Not only with injury, but also everyone started copying Tiger, and so therefore he needed to reinvent himself to get there. And again, that links into those hours of development, and putting those hours of practice in to be an expert, as you mentioned, but also then linking it in. And it's brilliant that we can get this all from reading, all from learning. And the internet has pretty much opened education now to be different than going to college or going to university or whatever we call it across the world. It's now it's kind of online, and we can develop that, and we can listen to the best investors in the world or the best leaders of business in the world and understand exactly what's going on. So that's brilliant. So blindsided, how have you been blindsided, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, sure. The reason that I started my own firm a few years ago, it was the third time in my career that I was actually part of an acquisition. And my path to partnership and executive change, right? I before I was 34, 33, I'd been acquired 3 times already. And so that's kind of where I said to myself, all right, I'm not going to put myself in a position to be sold unless I'm the one doing the selling. So the last time that I was part of an acquisition, it completely changed the culture. It completely changed the organization. I really recognized this is not how it should be done. It's not something that I want to be a part of anymore. So when the management team makes those announcements, recognizing all of the different factors that could have been done, should have been done, in order to kind of keep what made that place special. That's probably the time that I think about being blindsided the most, and really just how I reacted to it, and really growing my own practice and going out on my own, and saying I don't want the world to happen to me. I'm gonna make the world, I'm gonna influence that world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and how did you find, what did you think as being acquired? And that's obviously a lot of people are going to be listening to this are either doing that or exiting, as the nature of the private equity world. As an individual within the business, and now as a running your own firm, and that psychologist type element, what kind of couple of things maybe could that firm have done better to communicate? It may not have changed the scenario because it might have been that business needed to go in that direction. Yeah. But what do you think that business could have done better from an insider's point of view?
So that there's going to be a number of questions that people are going to have once they hear the news, right? Mm-hmm. Even the people who are the most open to change and the most kind of openness to experience is what we would call it from a Big 5 personality perspective. People still are going to, your instant reaction is to ask questions and ask the question, what's in it for me, right? What's going to happen to me? What's going to change? And so having some of those answers and really thinking through that, and really, having just even a halfway decent communications plan about this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, these are the benefits, and then having the courage as a leader when somebody asks a hard question, say, I don't know the answer to that right now. I think that's really the best way to do it.
A lot of that comes down to communication, I think, from what you've just mentioned. Absolutely. There, it's being able to communicate effectively and put that in. Absolutely. So I'm curious, what advice would you give? I love this question. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self, Marc?
Invest in Apple. Is that should have maybe invest in Amazon and all those other things. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
So what I would say is diversify my opportunities and diversify my experiences.
Okay.
David Epstein wrote a really interesting book called Range, which really looked at how we as a society are moving more and more towards like being hyper specialized and hyper focused. Okay. When you look at the data, it actually shows that the people who get as different of experiences over time, those are the ones who end up really being successful, right? He looks at like an Abby Wambach, who, incredible female soccer player, won a few World Cups. She didn't start playing soccer until she was 14 or 15, and she was playing basketball. And you see the way that she goes in for a header, she's actually boxing out more like a basketball player than a soccer player. And so that variance in difference, right? You look at Dominican baseball players, they're very similar. They don't play organized baseball. I think in France, the organized soccer programs don't start until kids are older than 10 or 12 years old. And so those like backyards, kicking a ball around, playing with your friends, that free play, those free experiences, those actually lead to you really thinking differently about things, right? You don't think the same way as everybody else when you come in it from a different angle. And so if I would have, spent some time as an undergraduate, instead of taking the classes that, I took the classes that were the most interesting, and I took the classes that were best for my major and helped me get into graduate school and all those things. But, should I take in some more finance classes? Should I take in some more classes in a different topic and really taking advantage of that opportunity for those general education classes? Some of those kind of things I think about, and I would have really done.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot looking back, and you think of the opportunities we have, certainly when we're younger and we have less baggage, I suppose is maybe not the best word, but I'm sure we'll understand that. And there's a lot going on in our lives, and there's a lot that comes with it. It's what more opportunities could we have taken? And I think a lot of the good people will always answer that question with, I wish I'd got more experience. I wish I'd spent more time learning, and I wish I'd done X. I wish I'd done Y. But we don't know at the time, and hindsight's certainly a wonderful thing. So Marc, with regards to I've got anybody here that wants to kind of reach out and have a conversation. Is there any, what's your kind of best contact details for anybody to reach out to you if they want to find out a bit more about what you do, or equally understand a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, LinkedIn at Marc Prine, Prine, Marc, M-A-R-C at mipconsultingllc.com is my email address. Any way to kind of, Twitter, however it is, at MIP2604. So those are kind of the easiest ways, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Marc, giving us really great insight into, I think, an area that definitely is of interest to private equity firms, but I don't think enough utilize it. And certainly since we've had conversations, I've had a lot more discussions with PE firms, and I'm actually surprised at how many firms are actually doing something at this level, but still obviously having challenges with hiring. So maybe they're not doing as much of it on the due diligence side. As you said, it's mainly more centered around that, what I regard as crisis management. We've got this wrong 3 times now. What are we doing? Let's get this right. Let's bring something in to really understand things. So look, really appreciate your insight. Thank you very much for your time. And let's see where we go from here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Alex.
Thank you for listening to the Private Equity Podcast on www.raw-selection.com.